成だ。雪平裏メニューその20回。サワラおにぎり茶漬けだ。
One of the most memorable moments of Food Wars is when Ishiki challenges Yukihira to a challenge in the dorm while Ishiki is wearing nothing but an apron, and it's magical. But before we make this Ochazuke, thank you to Ridge Wallet for sponsoring today's video. Thank you to ridge.com/CHEFPK for sponsoring today's video. I can now hold 12 cards with cash without losing speed or strength. Made of premium titanium materials. What is this? Break Brother, you've returned. You think you can get rid of me? It is I, Deal. I have come back stronger than ever. Take this. Pathetic. So easily. Nani? With a lifetime warranty and free worldwide shipping, I cannot be easily defeated, Big Brother. You cannot surpass me. I can't keep up. Where is he? No! Use the links below at ridge.com/CHEFPK for 10% off and free worldwide shipping. The first thing we're going to do is be making our rice. So for this, we're just going to need a little bit of white short grain rice. Go ahead and measure it out. Make sure you wash it 3 times and fill it to the appropriate knuckle and get that started. Now we have to make our kelp tea. For this, you're going to need 1 4-inch piece of dried konbu, and that hopefully fits. Just break it down if you need to for this pot. Once you have your konbu in there, also add in 1/2 sheet worth of toasted nori. This is going to give it a really nice flavor as well. Give it a little flip-de-doo for some show, and then fill it with about 250 milliliters worth of water. Bring this over the stove and bring it up just before it simmers. Right before it simmers, make sure you pull out that little bit of konbu, otherwise it gets a little bit weird. Continue to simmer this over a medium heat for an additional 10 to 15 minutes just to help extract all of that flavor. We're also going to season this with just a pinch of blurry Himalayan salt, or just a really nice salt of your choice, and then finally hit it with a 1/4 teaspoon worth of green tea. Make sure that your green tea does get saturated and submerged and not just float to the top, just so that way it soaks properly. Now go ahead and let this steep for about 3 to 5 minutes, totally personal preference. I like to go for 3 minutes just so it's a lighter taste. Now go ahead and strain everything out into your container of choice, and once it's strained out, just go ahead and place it back into your pot, but keep it off of the heat. We can rewarm this if we need to, but you don't really want to cook this too much further. Make sure you clean up your mess because you always make a mess somehow. Luckily, I was able to find some mackerel at my local Awajimaya, and it was already filleted, but I had a very strong feeling that this did not have its pin bones removed because no one removes pin bones for you unless you're willing to pay for it. I did pat this dry just a little bit to make it a little bit easier to work with, and then I started trimming this down just a little bit by removing a little bit of the fins and then trying to find out where all of these pin bones were. There were a significant amount of pin bones in this mackerel, and you do want to make sure you remove them as you find them and take your time doing this because you're going to chew into a nice, creamy, beautiful piece of fish only to start chewing on pin bones, and that's not fun for anybody. Once you found and removed all of those pin bones, I was left with 1 larger fillet and then 2 smaller pieces, and you have all of this waste. To make your life easier later, go ahead and take a paper towel and continue to pat down all of your fish. This is going to leave you with a fish that's not saturated when we go to actually start cooking it. Now I'm using a cast iron dish with this filled with a significant amount of olive oil because the olive oil is going to be what we actually cook the fish with. Heat this over a nice low-medium heat and start gradually placing your fish in here. If you see it start to sizzle, this is ready to go. I ended up dropping all of my fish in here, but I noticed that as soon as I dropped my bigger piece in, it did curl on me a little bit, so I used chopsticks just to help coerce it into place. Also, make sure you don't use chopsticks to try to move your fish around because if you do, you have a chance of ripping off the skin like I did, which we're just going to go ahead and place back into the oil to eat later. Now, after about 2 to 3 minutes, we want to start using a large spoon to start pouring over this hot oil over the fish. The hot oil is going to be what actually starts cooking the fish, and this will take some time. It takes about 7 to 8 minutes of constantly pouring that hot oil over the fish. I was moving this off of the heat as necessary so that way the bottom wouldn't burn while still trying to use the oil to cook the fish. Again, this does take a little bit of time, but you only need to spend about 7 to 8 minutes doing this. Try to get the fish onto somewhat of a cooling rack and realize that some of the skin did peel back on your fish, but you were left with a few pieces that had some really nice crispy skin. After removing all of your fish from the pan, make sure that these do drain just a little bit, and you can see we're left with one piece that had this really beautiful skin on it while the other one did. The other one that didn't have skin is going to be a sacrifice for testing, and it was absolutely phenomenal. Remember, the better the olive oil you use to cook with, the better the flavor is going to be for the fish. So we're just gonna eat this one. This is gonna be our snack. Now place a little bit of water on your working surface so that way your rice doesn't immediately stick to whatever you're working with. I tried to actually form the onigiri first so that way I had somewhat of a shape to start working with. I realized that this actually wasn't going to work and I'm gonna need a pretty significant piece of onigiri for this. So I laid out my rice, making a small dent for where I'm going to put my fish. I cut the mackerel into 3 separate pieces and started to try to place this into my onigiri, making sure I don't crush it. Realized that the first method of the rice that I was going to try to use didn't work out, so I went ahead and reformed the onigiri and took my thumb and inserted it into the top of the onigiri to make a small hole for the fish to sit in. This is probably not the right way of doing it, but I felt like it was the best way for me to try to do this. I placed in 1 piece of fish first, trimmed down the second piece to make sure it was still tasting good, placed the second piece on top of the first, and then finally topped it off with that third final piece of fish. This makes it to where we have this really stuffed piece of onigiri with about 3 ounces worth of mackerel on the inside. Once you've formed it back into your bigger onigiri, place this into your bowl of choice, and then pour in some of that hot kelp tea. You want to make sure you pour this in right before you decide to eat it. Garnish it with a little bit of fresh parsley leaves, followed by a few strips of nori, and there it is, Yukihira's springtime mackerel ochazuke. So since GoPro-kun decided to not record audio, it's me, Editing Paul, who's going to describe this. So cheers. Grab yourself a bite of a little bit of the mackerel, a little bit of the rice, make sure it's soaked with a little bit of that broth. The broth itself was this beautiful kelp flavor, a little saltiness, and that beautiful green tea. The mackerel itself was super rich, tasted of olive oil, was salted really nicely, and the entire thing just warms your soul. My name is CHEFPK, get subscribed, and remember, keep playing with your food. Now, we're gonna go ahead and grab a little bit of furikake and just dump it all over this dish. Of course you would do something like this. You're gonna take this beautiful dish and just dump a bunch of furikake. Look how much you put on this. You didn't put the lid back on the furikake, you didn't close the cabinet door, and you just walked away with the camera still rolling.